Hello and welcome to Improve Your Landscape Photography here on Facebook. My name's Kirk Ballhead and today we've got a short video tutorial for you on how to reduce digital noise using Adobe Lightroom. Now before I begin, I just want to say a couple of things about noise. Don't get too hung up on it, because whilst we can see it on our computer screens with these new high-resolution screens that we have, it's not always apparent when we come to print our images unless we print them really big. So what you see on your screen might not be what comes out of the printer. So don't get too worried about it. Should we have to increase our ISO and get more digital noise into our images, then we have certain tools that we can use to actually help reduce that noise. There are three types of noise. The first is one that we can't really do a lot about. Noise is actually generated by the circuitry inside our cameras, mostly by a piece of equipment called the analog to digital converter. This actually takes the signal off our camera sensor and turns it into a digital format. In our first image we're going to have a look at, we'll see something that's called vertical or horizontal pattern noise. Now on the face of it, it looks quite a nice image. This one was taken down in Wiltshire in the Vale of Pewsey early one morning. Looks quite good until we go in close, and I would always recommend that you go in past 1:1 and maybe even to 3:1 to have a look at digital noise, because that's where we'll see it better. Can we see here this pattern that we're having in the shadow areas? It's a series of vertical lines. You can see it through the trees here in the shadows, even in the brighter areas up here. Appears all over the image. It's not random, it's very uniform. And this is a problem with how the camera circuitry is recording the detail from the sensor. In this case, it was so bad that the camera had to be returned to the manufacturers to have the software upgraded in it, and that actually alleviated the problem. There's not a lot we can actually do to remove this types of pattern noise. So if you see these vertical lines, or they can occur horizontally in your images, and maybe a phone call to the camera's manufacturers would be your best option. Okay, returning back to 1:1. Next image we have here, we're going to have a look at luminance noise. Again, this is noise that is due to the way the information's read off our sensors, but this is something we can do something about. So if we go into 3:1, just wait for the image to load here, we're looking for a speckling effect in areas of, in this case, the sky. Now we can see that, can't we? You can see that quite clearly. The sky is not smooth in tone. There is this speckling effect there. Not always will that come out on your print, as I said earlier, but we can actually do something about it in Adobe Lightroom. And this is the little drop-down box that we're concerned with here. It's detail. And these are the default settings that are applied: sharpening, noise reduction, amount, radius, detail, masking, luminance. Detail and contrast are going to be greyed out until we start to use the luminance, and then they come into play. Colour and detail. Colour is set by default at 25, detail at 50 and smoothness at 50. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about these sliders. I'm just going to show you in this video how to use them. So let's forget the top box first of all, the sharpening, and let's come down to noise reduction, because that's what we're going to try and reduce, this mottling effect in the sky. It's luminance noise. So we use our luminance slider, and as we move it to the right, we will watch traces of that noise start to disappear. You see it going? We're now up to 43. And it's almost completely gone around 60. What in effect is happening there is the image has been smoothed out. So we're actually losing a lot of detail. If we come back out, we have a little boat here. Well, probably not so little actually, quite a large boat in this bright area. So we're at noise reduction of 61. If we go back, you can see the mottling effect comes through again. So using these sliders is a delicate balance between removing the digital noise and maintaining detail. To help us do that, we have two other sliders here. We have the detail and the contrast. So we can usually play about with the detail and the contrast sliders. As we move the detail to the left, we actually lose detail. We move it to the right, we actually gain detail. The further we go to the right, we have to be careful we're not going to start introducing little blodgies. Little blodgies? Little blodgy areas in our sky. The contrast again, more use in high ISO images, not so much in these. This is low ISO, as we can see here. I used ISO 400 for this image. Now we come over to sharpening our image. So what we've actually done, we've actually blurred our whole image to actually remove traces of noise. What we're going to do now is sharpen our image to actually try and bring back a bit of detail. So by using our sharpening slider, now we can go a little bit above the standard 25. We don't want to go too high. This actually, as it says, it controls the amount of sharpening we use. The radius slider actually tells us the threshold at which this sharpening starts to take effect. So if we go to the right, we're ignoring detail, and it's only larger detail is being sharpened. If we go to the left, then smaller detail is likely to be sharpened. Not a great amount of use at low ISO, more high ISO. Same with the detail, how much detail we now have in our images. As we move it to the right, we can start to see some of the digital noise coming back in. So 50 is a fairly good setting for anything that's not too noisy. But now we have probably one last tool which can really make so much of a difference, and this is the masking slider. What this is doing is, like in most masks, it's preventing the sharpening from occurring in certain areas. We don't want our flat areas, the areas behind the ship and in the sky, to be sharpened because we've got those nice and smooth. What we want is the outline, like the ship, to be sharpened. So if we hold down the Alt key on our keyboard and then click on this masking slider, what's going to happen is our image is going to turn black and white. And there we go. In this case, it's all turned white. Remember, in masks, black conceals, white reveals. So what we want to do is move this slider by keeping our finger on the Alt key to the right, and gradually our image is going to take on this black and white appearance. Where the white areas are is where the sharpening is going to take place. The black areas are going to have no sharpening. So the area behind the ship isn't going to be sharpened at all. The noise isn't going to be magnified. So if we take our finger off the slider, off the Alt key, there we can see the sky and the background behind the ship remains lovely and smooth. Our ship does have quite a grotty outline, I could call it. So now our job is to readjust these sliders to try and alleviate that. Now I like to our radius slider down to about 0.6, 0.7, and as you can see, that is starting to alleviate the problem. Reducing our sharpening down to about 40, that's helping too. Remember, this area behind the ship isn't being sharpened at all, just the ship. And that looks quite nice because remember we are zoomed in at 3:1. Come back out and that looks rather nice. Go into our sky. We can see very little digital noise, and what's there is not going to come out in any prints whatsoever, no matter how large you blow them up. So we have a nicely sharpened and nicely noise reduced image. Have a look at the before and after. There's the before. There's the after. See, we made quite an impact on it. Come down to our ship and do exactly the same again. There's the before and there's the after. We can now go on to make other processing changes to our image if we want. Now we've got it nicely sharp. Moving on to another image. This one was taken at ISO 100. So there's not a lot of noise in this image at all. It was 4 seconds long, I seem to remember, 5 seconds long. So there's not a lot there at all, and nothing that's going to come out in our prints. But should we want to reduce it a bit further, I'd recommend we move your radius down to about 0.6. So let's use our Luminance Noise reduction just to reduce the amount of noise. And remember, we're smoothing our image now. So we're about 30. We've smoothed out the noise. What we need to do now is bring back a little bit of sharpness that we've lost on our structures. So once again, we hold down our Alt key, click on the masking slider, and our image goes white. And then as we move our slider to the right, it becomes black and white. And there we go. That's about the right level. We can zoom out and make sure we get all the detail in. So once again, hold down our Alt key, click the slider, and that's quite nice. The white areas are now being sharpened and the black areas are having no sharpening, so the noise is not going to be magnified in those areas. Come back out, zoom in. That's where we were. Don't forget we are 3:1, very much closer than we'll ever look at it in a print, and see the before. There's the before with just a little bit of mottling, and the after a lot smoother. As I say, don't get too hung up on digital noise, because in most circumstances it's not going to appear in your final prints. One final image here, taken this specially to show other types of noise, and we can see here up at the top this was taken at 25,600 ISO. So as we zoom in here on this gentleman's head, we can see an awful lot of noise. In fact, go on the lady's coat again. If we just remove the colour noise reduction, we can see how the image looked before. This is because our camera sensors having trouble deciding what colour is in this particular part of the image, and it can't read it, and it's basically throwing a wobbly. So Adobe have set a base noise reduction for colour of 25, and that does very nicely in nearly all circumstances. It just removes that back down to luminance noise. So once again, we have our sliders that we can play about with. We can reduce our luminance, which is that splotchy, speckly effect. And if you watch, if we go all the way to the right, we'll remove all detail and contrast. We can see our image has smoothed out completely. We've lost nearly all the noise, but our image has become almost unrecognisable. So as I said earlier, this is a balancing act. We want to bring a little bit of detail back in. So we see the chap's ear starting to appear, and we can see artifacts starting to appear. They aren't particularly nice, so let's ease off on our details until they disappear. Contrast. We can start to bring contrast back into our image. Keep zooming out, have a look at it, full screen. We've done quite well. We need to apply a bit of sharpening to see if we can bring out a bit more detail now. Let's reduce this down to about 0.6 and start to bring some sharpness back in. Start to see little artifacts starting to appear now. So let's just ease back a little bit. Increase the detail. A bit more. And now hold down our Alt key and let's mask out the areas we don't want any sharpening applied to. Again, for this image, if we go too far, because it is lacking in dynamic range, because it is at such a high ISO, we're going to lose a lot of the areas where we want sharpening applied. So I'd come to about somewhere like that. We're at 42 there. And we've not done a bad job. We can maybe just tweak the amount a little bit, bring it back. Might need to add a little bit more colour luminance reduction. What that's actually doing, it's desaturating our images. If we go too far, then we actually lose colour detail. We want to retain as much as possible. So, again, considering that image was shot at 25,600 ISO, we've now reduced a lot of detail in her jacket, reduced it in her face and this gentleman's head as well. And we have now a fairly acceptable image. Again, taken under very extreme circumstances, and it's probably not something that we would do as a matter of course. But you can see that we do have the ability now to actually reduce digital noise in Adobe Lightroom. So I hope that's helped a little bit demystify these sliders here. And I hope it now gives you confidence to go and have a little bit of play for yourself. So don't get too hung up on digital noise. It's not going to manifest itself as obviously in your prints as it does in some of your images on your computer screens. So this is Chris Beard from Improve Your Landscape Photography here on Facebook, and I'll see you again in a few days' time with a new video. Bye.